Welcome to our channel. In this video, we are going to talk about top 10 wars that happened in the world. So before starting, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for future updates. Countless battles have been fought around the world throughout history over issues such as religious differences, territorial disputes, politics, and ethnicity. While war is always destructive and costly, there have been a few wars throughout history that have been particularly disastrous in terms of both deaths and overall destruction. The top 10 deadliest wars in human history are examined in this video. Number 10. 30 Years' War. Between 1618 and 1648, the 30 Years' War was fought in Central Europe between the European powers of the time. Although the war began as a fight between Protestant and Catholic nations from the dissolving Holy Roman Empire, it swiftly grew to encompass much of the European continent in the years that followed. Thousands of people died as a result of the deployment of enormous armies, including a substantial contingent of mercenary fighters, making the 30 Years' War one of the worst battles in human history. In addition to its theological roots, the 30 Years' War spread over Central Europe as a result of dynastic and territorial disputes prominent at the time. Political leaders, seeing the struggle as an opportunity to remake the European continent in their own interests, poured vast sums of money into the conflict, with terrible results. Although particular regions of Europe suffered more than others, it is estimated that nearly 8 million individuals were killed as a result of the 30 Years' War, with countless others wounded. Number 9. Chinese Civil War. The Chinese Civil War was a battle between communist troops and the Republic of China in the mid-20th century. The Chinese Civil War was divided into two parts, with the first taking place between 1927 and 1936 and the second between 1946 and 1950, due to the outbreak of World War II. Following the fall of the Qing dynasty, the battle erupted. As government and communist groups attempted to grab power in the ensuing power vacuum, conflict erupted quickly, with catastrophic consequences. To make matters worse, foreign political and military aid, particularly from the Soviet Union, exacerbated tensions between communists and nationalists, as both groups launched an active campaign to eliminate the other. Although hostilities ceased with the outbreak of the Second World War and the Japanese Empire's invasion of China, military turmoil erupted once more with the war's conclusion, when the Kuomintang and communist troops took to the streets to restart combat. In total, it is estimated that nearly 8 million people, both military personnel and civilians, died as a result of the Chinese Civil War. Many of these deaths are often attributed to the mass atrocities and genocides perpetuated by both Communist and Kuomintang forces during the duration of the war. Number 8. The Russian Civil War. Between 1917 until 1926, the Russian Civil War was a multi-party conflict fought between the Red Army, Communist, and the White Army, Nationalist, armies. Following the dissolution of Tsar Nicholas II's reign and the collapse of the Russian Empire, Bolshevik forces commanded by Vladimir Lenin engaged nationalist forces for control of the Russian interior, with terrible results in terms of lives lost and property destroyed. The violent conflict, which lasted about 6 years and pitted Russians against Russians, saw several skirmishes and battles erupt in the country's interior. Despite terrible losses on both sides of the fight, the ceasefire would be short-lived, as the triumphant communist dictatorship soon ushered in a period of terror and repression in the decades that followed. Nevertheless, it is currently accepted by historians that the conflict claimed approximately 9 million lives, with several million more maimed or seriously wounded by the war. Number 7. The Dungan Revolt. The Dungan Revolt, also known as the Hui Minorities' War, was a religious struggle that raged in western China from 1862 to 1877. The war began when Hui Muslims in China began rioting in protest to the Qing dynasty's continued religious and racial oppression. The Qing authorities struck with surprising speed in reaction to the riots, unleashing deadly reprisals and killings against Hui Muslims across western China. As the struggle progressed, the Hui rebels found themselves outmanned and outgunned by their foes, as the Qing government waged a «total war» campaign against both rebels and Muslim civilians. Although the Hui rebels battled valiantly for several years, their lack of coordination, leadership, and organization eventually brought them down, as Hui Muslims found it impossible to command concerted attacks against the Qing army. However, currently accepted estimates place overall deaths in the vicinity of 10 million, with millions of other civilians, rebels, and soldiers wounded by the conflict. Number 6. First World War. The First World War, popularly known as the Great War, was a global battle that began on July 28, 1914, in Europe. During the four-year battle, about 70 million military people were mobilized as the European continent was consumed by fighting in practically every corner of the globe. When the war ended in November 1918, Europe was left in ruins on a scale never seen before in history, with the continent undergoing profound political, social, economic, and cultural transformations as a result of the conflict. In total, approximately 9 million military personnel lost their lives during the Great War, with an additional 9 to 10 million civilians killed. Number 5. Taiping Rebellion. The Taiping Rebellion, or Taiping Civil War, was a civil war in China between the Qing government and the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom from 1850 and 1864. The Taiping troops, led by Hong Xiuquan, who claimed to be Jesus Christ's brother, launched a nationalist, political, and religious war against the Qing dynasty in order to convert the Chinese people to Christianity. The Taiping rebels, who were based in modern-day Nanjing, managed to seize control of large swaths of South China, with an estimated 30 million people under their influence at its peak. Although the Taiping rebels had some success in the first decade of their war, they were eventually defeated by an attempted coup, combined with their failure to seize Beijing, China's capital city. Militia armies, most notably the Shang Army, were soon mobilized against the Taiping rebels as their own troops began to fracture, owing to the disintegration of a centralized command structure. The Shang Army had pushed the Taiping rebels all the way to Nanjing, their capital, within 2 years, and had captured the city in June 1964. Estimated deaths from the Taiping Rebellion are difficult to measure due to the lack of official records from this time period. However, most estimates place the number of dead at approximately 20 to 30 million, with thousands of others wounded. Number 4. The Qing conquest of the Ming Dynasty. The Qing conquest of the Ming Dynasty, also known as the Ming-Qing transition, or Manchu conquest of China, was a decades-long battle that lasted from 1618 to 1683 between the Qing and Ming dynasties. Rebel groups, together with bands of peasants, waged war against the ruling Ming dynasty in the intention of obtaining reform, based on a list of complaints known as the Seven Grievances, which enumerated the key social and political difficulties facing China at the time. Over the course of nearly 70 years, the rebels captured city after city, with enormous numbers of Ming officers and government officials defecting to the rebel cause, once it was apparent that victory was futile. In 1644, rebel parties united to form the Qing dynasty, with Hong Taiji as their first emperor, thanks to their common front against the Ming. However, triumph would not come for another almost 40 years, as pockets of resistance from Ming sympathizers flourished in the south, resulting in decades of deadly struggle. Generally speaking, however, it is currently estimated that nearly 25 million people died as a result of the war, with millions of additional people maimed and scarred from the countless battles. Number 3. Second Sino-Japanese War. The Second Sino-Japanese War was fought between the Republic of China and the Imperial Japanese Empire. The war, which lasted from July 7, 1937, to September 2, 1945, is usually regarded as one of the deadliest in human history, as Japanese soldiers raped, pillaged, and slaughtered innumerable Chinese citizens and military men in their pursuit of victory. The conflict arose as the Japanese Empire sought to expand its power and influence into Asia's heartland, where resources, labor, and food were ample for their expanding empire. In July 1937, Japanese forces used an incident at the Marco Polo Bridge in Wanping as a reason to invade, rapidly overwhelming Chinese forces with nearly 500,000 troops. Despite the fact that the Chinese fought heroically against the Japanese until 1945, the end of World War II, Japan implemented a violent and repressive control system that effectively brought the country to its knees. Although figures vary significantly, depending on the source, it is generally accepted that nearly 29 million people died as a result of the Second Sino-Japanese War. Number 2. Lushan Rebellion. The Lushan Rebellion was a significant war in China that took place on December 16, 755 AD. The insurrection, which lasted nearly 8 years, began when General Lushan declared himself Emperor of Northern China in defiance of the established Tang dynasty. The Tang dynasty, fearful that their reign was coming to an end, enlisted roughly 4,000 mercenaries to accompany their army in the battles that followed. The conflict, which lasted 3 emperors and caused massive social, economic, and political turmoil in China, was finally put down in 763 AD. In total, scholars have placed overall deaths, for both military and civilians, at an astounding 36 million people. Number 1. Second World War. The Second World War, also known as World War II, was a vast global struggle that lasted from 1939 to 1945 and involving nearly every country on the planet. The two military coalitions, divided into 2 camps, the Axis versus the Allies, engaged in complete